Chapter, clear to play.
Hello again, everybody. This is Papa Smurf at MiniWarGaming.com. I've been asked to make a set of tank treads or marks in the ground that a battle tank would make as it passed over the ground. Very simple, I thought, at first. Well, let me show you what I did. I've already marked out my base here with the shape that I want it to be. So I'm going to proceed to cut that with a jigsaw, and afterwards I'm going to shape the edges with my knife. Making the total base is straightforward. It's just a matter of cutting and sanding with the sanding block to make it nice and smooth. Pavement that goes over a hill. One important thing to watch out for is the walls. Make them as square as possible. That's important because we're going to have some stone walls that butt up against these sides. Let's proceed with it. In case anybody is wondering, I always paint surfaces that are going to be glued, especially if it's styrofoam, because I have the habit of using the white carpenter's glue, but I also use super glue, and it eats styrofoam. So in order to protect the styrofoam, I always make sure there's a good layer of paint on it. Well, the walls have all been installed. One on this side of the culvert and one on this side. The painting will come a little later. I put a little bit of plaster in here to fill in cracks. The rest of it is looking really good. And now I have to cut the culvert. I've already made some lines where I'm going to do some cutting, and it's going to fit perfectly underneath the roadway, and that will be next. Because I didn't have a piece of metal piping to put under and substitute for a culvert, what I ended up doing was manufacturing one out of paint sticks. These are exactly 1 inch in width, and when I sliced them down the middle they were 1/2 inch, so my culvert, and it's going to be dressed up and painted to look like a concrete poured in place culvert. It'll be 1 inch by 1/2 inch in height. Okay, that's going to look real good when it's done. To complete my painting on this model, I first started with the tank tracks, and I painted them with a wash, a dark gray wash, as you can see. Following that, I went and put on several coats of a medium gray just to represent some kind of a pavement that goes over this little hill here. The stone walls, I chose 3 different colors. This one called Country Maple. That was the basic color that I put on the walls, and then I dry brushed up with these 2 other kinds of brown. One is called chocolate brown and one's called cinnamon brown. And it's come out quite well. I'm very pleased with the results of the painting on the stone walls. Well, we've come to the end of our little project here. How does it look? It's sort of like a little bridge with stone walls on either side and a clear set of tank tracks going right up the middle. And it's interesting to know that during World War II, virtually any foot soldier could tell at a glance whether tank tracks in the mud were friend or foe. And the reason for that is because the enemy tanks were so different than their own tanks. Enemy tanks had a different wheelbase. They were wider and they were much heavier. So they made a deeper impression in the ground that they passed over. And the treads were wider, longer. So one glance and they could identify, is it one of ours or one of theirs? In terms of identification, modern crime scene investigators, sometimes the only evidence they have for a crime is the impression that a shoe would make. However, it gives many clues as to who committed the crime. Just by one glance, they know the approximate weight of the person and the height. Apparently, they can tell by the stride of the person, how far their footsteps are from each other, how tall they are. I suppose a taller person has longer stride than a short person. It's also interesting to know that the FBI has a huge database on footwear treads and tire treads. And it helps a great deal in solving crimes. That's how they identify which one is the culprit. And it's interesting to know that sometimes, just like this little piece of plaster that's wedged itself in here, sometimes a little pebble or a twig wedges itself into the tread, and that identifies the shoe. So it's an apple. What's that got to do with anything? Well, quite a bit. Almost any apple that you may buy in a supermarket has a little sticker on it. Now this little sticker here has a barcode, and it says Royal Gala, and at the bottom here there's a number, 4173 Chile. So even without being a trained investigator, I know that this is a Royal Gala apple, and it was grown in Chile. However, because of the barcode and that number, a trained investigator could tell you not only the country, but the state or province in the country, the farm, and sometimes even which field it came from. All identification because of that sticker. Okay. Well, now, you have to realize that sometimes there are extremes. Case in point. Many years ago, this young woman that I met told me a really interesting story, an experience that she had in school, an experience she will never forget. It had something to do with identification. Both she and her classmates all semester long had studied birds. Everything about birds. Until the final day, the day of the examination. And the last question that was on the exam, as they sat down to write it, they soon discovered this question was a doozy. For this question, which was worth 40% of the mark, the teacher had arranged 8 dead birds on his desk, and he'd covered them with a great big cotton sheet so that only their little feet were sticking up out of the sheet. And the students had to go up there, look at all those bare bird feet, and identify the birds. A task for which they were not ready, not prepared at all. And the frustration level started to set in. There were students sitting there snapping pencils in half and throwing them down, frustrated with the impossible task. And then there's this kid stood up at the back. Every crowd has one of these, a true alpha male, one who won't hesitate to let his feelings be known and who won't back down from anybody. Well, he stood on his feet. He called the teacher an idiot and a few other choice names for having such a ridiculous question on the exam. Mad. The teacher got equally as mad and said, "I'm going to put you on report, young man. What's your name?" To which the student replied, "What's my name?" Then he marched up to the front. He ripped off his shoes and his socks. He grabbed that sheet that was covering the bodies of the dead birds. He laid down on the floor in front of the teacher, put the sheet over his face and his body so that just his bare feet were sticking out. And from underneath that sheet, he said, "You're so smart, you tell me what my name is." The whole class roared with laughter. Never had they seen anything so ridiculously funny as that. The teacher stormed out of the room, on his way to the principal's office to complain about these awful students. A delegation of students also left the room on their way to the principal's office to complain about the awful teacher. Well, the net result was the principal sat down and had a little chat with the teacher. And that final question on the exam, worth 40% of the mark, well, that was stricken from the test. After the principal examined it, he thought it was an unfair question, a question that the students had never been taught the answers to in the first place. So it just goes to show that sometimes things can be taken to an extreme. Anyway, that's my take on it. This is Papa Smurf. If you've really enjoyed this little piece of modeling that I've made here, then please subscribe to Papa Smurf if you want to see more. And I look forward to seeing you all again really soon in the next video.